You're listening to the Getting Smart podcast. I'm Mason Pasha. We live in an incredibly polarized time. I don't think that's news to anyone. It's basically a headline anywhere you look. And one antidote to this difference is powerful learning experiences, bringing people closer together, showing them things that they had not seen before, and really building empathy muscles in everybody, from understanding places to understanding people to understanding motivations. Recently, I got an email from an organization who's doing really incredible work in this placemaking and experience providing world. And I get to talk to the co founder today. So today I am joined by David McCullough III, the co founder and CEO of American Exchange Project, a nonprofit organization that sends high school students on week-long trips to different parts of the United States to foster understanding and reduce this polarization. David, thanks so much for being here.
Mason, thanks for having me and for the great introduction.
Yeah,
What an
you bet.
excellent framing.
We talk about it a lot. So I'm going to start with something I found on your LinkedIn that made me smile. What is one surprising skill that you gained from being a narrator and deckhand for Boston Harbor Cruises?
Yeah. So yes, I had two jobs for the Boston Harbor Cruise Company.
It sounds like it.
4 days a week. I was the one part deckhand, one part theatrical performer for the kids aboard the Codzilla, which is
Incredible.
both the demon monster codfish that haunts the outer depths of Boston's outer harbor and the fastest speedboat anywhere. And then the other 2 days a week, I was on the opposite side of the age demographic doing the 45-minute putt-putt historical cruise of the Boston Harbor, where it was a very different mess. What I learned? I learned a ton about my city. And this has actually been very true at the American Exchange Project. It was amazing to me how little I knew about the city that I called home. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs here. I've spent most of my life in the Boston area. And almost all of the facts I was talking about during that historical cruise were new to me. And then I also learned how to drive a 12 horsepower jet boat and how to cut some very, very tight turns out in the Boston Harbor when our captain got a little sick of driving the thing in the late afternoon.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm sort of like a urbanist brained person. I love transit and all that kind of stuff. The thing I've always loved about biking is that on a bike, it fundamentally reframes how you see a city. You just
Oh my God, yeah.
notice things you've never seen before. You experience hills differently and topography. You
Yeah.
experience all kinds of things differently. And I can only imagine that doing that on the waterways of a major city like Boston, you also just totally see it differently. And that's how so many people came into the city to begin with. That's how they navigated and brought things in. So that's super cool.
We're a seafaring town. And by the way, I just got a new bike, so I've been appreciating Boston from the cycling perspective for the last few weeks, and that it's its own thing. Traveling at the ground level wherever you go. And no matter what way you travel, whether it's on a boat or a plane or a car or a bike or even by your own 2 feet, make sure you're looking around and paying attention. And that's where perspective is gained.
Totally agree. Okay, so I want to get in a little bit to the meat of our topic today. Not that we're not talking about it already with placemaking and place discovery, but your backstory is fun. You did this cross country road trip in college that really helped, I guess, generate this idea for the program that you created. So tell me a little bit about that road trip, what you saw, what you learned.
So in the summer after my junior year of college, I borrowed my mom's car and drove 7,100 miles across the country. I spent 2 months living in 3 towns that were the opposite of the town that I grew up in, Boston suburbs. I was in Cotulla, Texas, Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and Cleveland, Ohio. And I had not really intended for my own personal experience to ever be part of that road trip. I'd received funding from my university to do a research project on education in some of America's most impoverished communities. My little angle was that not enough folks who were researching the issue were talking to parents and teachers and kids, folks in the middle of it. They were focused at too high a level, in my opinion. And so my angle was I was going to hit the road, and rather than talking to experts and policy folks and big think people, I was going to talk to teachers, kids, and parents, and administrators, and folks in the middle of it. And I was going to live in those towns for a little while and kind of embed myself and get to know what was going on. And out of all of that, try to pull together some ideas about what's off in the grand strategy of how we educate our nation's poorest children. And that road trip changed my life in a few ways. First, it was the most profound educational experience of my life. And I had been to some incredible schools, and I had some wonderful teachers and wonderful parents. And yet, 2 months on the road had me learning more and generating more than any class I'd ever taken.
Hmm.
In addition to that, I made friends, real, true friends. And before the trip, my school made me sign a paper that it basically in legalese said, if you get beat up, it's not our fault. And I thought, okay, that's where we're beginning here. And not only did that not happen, the opposite of that happened everywhere I went. I was welcomed, even adopted. And many of the friends that I made on that trip 10 years later to this day are still great friends. In
Hmm.
fact, a few of them were at my wedding about 2 years ago. And that struck me. And then the third thing that really opened my life up in a lot of ways was that it not only filled my heart with a profound sense of purpose and drive. I've been a baseball player to that point. I wanted
Hmm.
to be a baseball player. Every fiber of my being wanted to be a baseball player. During my junior year of college, the game of baseball basically told me, "You're not a baseball player." and I was fresh off the Yale baseball team, and that road trip helped me figure out a new direction for myself. And because I went around the country in the summer of 2016, it made me really the one kid at Yale who could explain why Donald Trump was the president
Hmm.
and had been elected. And that issue of polarization and division and the evident lack of understanding people on one side had for the other side and the prejudices that grew from that ignorance became right away the kinds of issues I could shed some perspective on, though I was only 22 years old at the time. And when I got back, a lot of the professors who were part of the program that sent me on that road trip took a great interest in what I had done and what I was coming back to talk about.
Hmm.
And in the fall of 2018, after I'd finished my master's degree, I linked up with one of those professors, a guy named Paul Solomon, who'd been the economics correspondent for the PBS NewsHour for 35 years at that point, 30, 40 years at this point. And Paul had done across his career what I had done across 2 months, namely travel the country, talk to people, ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And we, over lunch, agreed that traveling and being curious and talking to whoever we ran into seemed to have within it some semblance of a solution to the forces that we saw tearing apart our country.
Hmm.
And that's where the conversation began that launched the American Exchange Project.
Do you happen to know the kind of origins of these exchange type programs? I
Yeah,
know that the kind of novel component of this is that it's primarily domestic. You're doing stuff in the United States to other places in the United States.
yeah,
But like growing up, I knew exchange students from East Germany and like a bunch of different places. So
yeah.
just curious if you have a picture of what that looks like.
I think as a culture and a society, I think we undervalue just how important these sorts of experiences are for young people. I don't know that I've ever met a person who's been on a study abroad who, when asked, doesn't describe their experience as life changing, terrific, one of the best things I've ever done, a
Totally.
highlight of my time at that school or university, you name it, with the sorts of superlatives that we're after as teachers. And I often think that many of the innovations and ideas that are the foundation for how we educate young people were once thought of as niceties, privileges. Going to school after 13, learning to read, arithmetic, studying the sciences, contemplating philosophy, you name it. And somewhere along the way, they went from a life changing nicety to a life changing necessity.
Hmm.
And when you look at the kind of two-part history of study abroad, I think we're at a moment where in this country, we really need to start looking at these sorts of exchange experiences as necessities for young people, especially in an era where young people are too often robbed of those in person social connections that are critical for their development in the name of spending more and more time on screens. So the history of study abroad is kind of broken, I think, into two halves. The first is the history of the coming of age ritual that so often involves leaving home, going to do something that is both valuable, full of developmental opportunities, challenging, and then infused with some of the flavors of the culture that that young person has grown up in.
Hmm.
And the history of those sorts of experiences are almost as old as civilization itself. And they are a marker of civilizations and societies that were very cohesive in their cultural identity.
Hmm.
We can go all the way back to Sparta, who sent their children. We know, 300 has them off killing a menacing wolf that's about, the size of a dinosaur. Not, that
Right.
didn't really happen, but they would send their early adolescents off to live in the woods for a year. And if they came back alive, they were Spartans. And in a
Hmm.
society that is very tough and demanding and priding of its warriors and its kind of manly spirit, that was indicative of Spartan culture. But bat and bar mitzvahs and gap years and the Birthright Israel program and the Erasmus program in Europe that are much more recent. There are letters. Jonathan Haidt writes about this beautifully in The Anxious Generation. There are letters of, I believe, 16th century noble English parents talking about sending their children to continental Europe for a period as a valuable coming of
Hmm.
age ritual. So the notion of going away, bettering yourself, and coming home is critical. And when you go away and you immerse yourself in another way of life, you learn from the world and then bring back to your world what you learn. The other history of study abroad is the one that is more tied to the programs that we see today at high schools and universities. The notion of going to another country, immersing yourself in that culture for your own betterment, was confined pretty much to the grand tour and was a marker in the raising of our society's elites.
Hmm.
Think of your Edith Wharton novels. Think of John Adams sending young John Quincy off to Russia for years. And he came back with 7 languages and grew to be probably the most intellectually impressive president we've ever had. After World War II, there was a great concern that all of the dehumanizing we had done to make the American public support the killing that the war required would be a real problem to the peace treaties we were trying to pass in that era. And so we would not like the thought that Japan was allowed to have a military again if we
Hmm.
felt the things that Americans felt about Japanese people during the 1940s. We would not like the notion of buying German cars or entering trade agreements with Japan.
Right.
And so efforts began right after the war to kind of rehumanize and reintegrate our culture with the cultures of the countries that we've been at war.
Huh.
And in 1946, the American Field Service, which had been an ambulance corps before World War I and World War II, and saw nationals from different countries, young nationals from different countries, serve alongside each other, hauling wounded soldiers off the battlefield, becoming great friends, and understood the power of these sorts of cross-cultural experiences. They sent in 1946 40 Americans to high school in Germany and 40 Germans to high school in America.
Hmm.
And then the State Department started funding them. And through the State Department funding, over the next about decade and a half, you see program after program after program popping. The International Cultural Youth Exchange, the Fulbright program, eventually the Peace Corps. All programs designed at getting young people of an impressionable age out and into the world for school, for service, for work, you name it. And
Hmm.
today, millions of young people a year study abroad all over the world. And hundreds of thousands of young people come to this country to study abroad. And at the individual level, and perhaps even at the level of the educator and the parent, we see these opportunities as great, fun, engaging, developmental opportunities for the people that get to do. If you hover above the superstructure of the global youth exchange network, you realize that in many ways it's actually a conflict prevention tool because we don't want to believe prejudicial or conflicting ideas and thoughts about people that we're friends with.
True.
And after the EU formed, a few members of the early European Union felt that, for many of the same reasons that the State Department felt we needed exchanges, felt that unless they made efforts to create a cohesive European culture through the many cultures that exist across Europe, their policies would really be in the soup. And about 20 years later, they established the Erasmus program, which funds young college students to spend a period of the year, I think it's either a semester or a trimester, at another European university. Over the last 30 years, something like 14 million students have taken advantage of the Erasmus program.
Wow.
It's so popular that the way we use the verb Google to say internet search, or the way certain parts of America, say Coke when they mean any type of what I say soda or pop, they say Erasmus instead of exchange student. Are you an Erasmus?
Interesting.
And today the EU pumps 3.75 billion euros a year into that program.
Okay, I have a lot more questions. Before I jump into them, give me like a picture of where the American Exchange Project is right now. Like how many students have you served? Is it
Sure.
how do students participate in it? Time of year, cost, that kind of stuff, just so our listeners can kind of
Yeah.
wrap their arms around the idea.
Well, I mean, as a quick definition, the American Exchange Project, as a quick picture, is a study abroad program with a twist. Rather than sending young people to other countries, we send them abroad within America. And we treat towns that are culturally and politically and socioeconomically and geographically very different from each other as if they were foreign countries to one another. So we'll send kids from Boston to Dodge City, Kansas, and from Riggins, Idaho to Palo Alto, California. The trips it's a 2-week experience where students will travel to another town for a week and then tag along when kids come to their town for that week. And to my earlier point about not knowing much about my own city, that's a really important week because it acts both as a window into another life, but then a mirror back on your own. And one might see their religion in a different way when someone from another faith comes to church, temple, synagogue with them and tries on their religion for a morning.
Totally.
One might see their daily job, whether that's at the Dairy Queen or milking cows or just bopping around the city, very differently when a young person who's never seen a skyrise or a cow before goes and experiences that. So we launched the program in 2019. We were then the geniuses that started the traveling program on the eve of the pandemic for about 2 years.
Fantastic timing.
Fantastic time. Really couldn't have nailed it.
Yep.
Sketching out on whiteboards how it would work and recruiting schools. And in 2021, we sent 20 students. In 2021, we sent 20 students on 4 exchanges between 4 towns across the country. Okay. Since 2021, we've put over 1,500 students on over 200 exchanges to over 100 towns across the country in almost 40 states. We right now have just wrapped up a summer where we've sent about 550 students on our exchanges, on about 67 exchanges across the country. We're moving into another year. I reckon we'll have between 65 and 80 high schools running anywhere from 1 to 4 exchanges apiece next summer. And the impact over the last 5 summers been more extraordinary than even I imagined years ago. I could not have predicted how much this would mean to the people that are taking part in it.
Is this program, it sounds like you're working with high schools to provide this opportunity. Is it a free program for students? Like how do they manage kind of numbers if this high school offers it? Do they say we have 5 spots?
So the program is totally free and there's no merit-based admission criteria of any kind.
Okay.
And I believe that this kind of experience ought to be a public good. And so I'm running this organization as close to a public good as a private organization can possibly run. And we operate through almost always high schools and sometimes community-based nonprofits, where we hire a teacher or employee of that organization who becomes the school's or the organization's exchange manager. And the whole program relies entirely on that person. They recruit students, they recruit host families, they plan itineraries, they do all of that with the help of our national team. And then they are the one part camp counselor, one part Peter Pan, running that fun week for the groups of students that arrive. And we're not a one-to-one exchange program. So it's not like we swap out Sudbury, Massachusetts, and send them all to Dodge City, Kansas, and then send everyone from Dodge up to Sudbury. We're actually a network of towns and schools that send their kids to each other in the summer. So no students go to the same town together. And if you're contemplating doing experiences like this in your schools, that is critical. It's
Yeah.
critical that they travel alone. It's critical that they get there with a group of students who are also from all over the country. And it's also critical that there are no barriers to entry because no one's special for being there. I mean, terrific. You got on the plane and you managed to sign
Right.
your name on the line. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely true of my travel experiences. The times where I've gone with my wife, who's my favorite travel companion, I end up meeting way fewer people. And then the times where I go by myself, I've made tons of new friends in the process. So I think that's
Yeah.
really, really smart that you only send one person from a school to at least that city. I'm One question I have, so these itineraries are developed by these volunteer roles or these kind of exchange manager positions. Do the students from that town get to play a role in designing the itinerary? I like
They
saying,
do. They
this is
do.
how I see my city and I want other kids to see it this way.
Yes, and that's a really important process. And I let me one quick correction too. The exchange managers we actually pay them, and it's
Got
about
it. Okay.
commensurate to what like a varsity coach would get paid. So it's a
Cool.
lot of work, and we do rely on loads of local volunteers to help that educator run the
Got it.
program. But yeah, so the itineraries are kind of a methodical process. To start, we define that every itinerary item needs to fit into one of four broadly defined buckets.
Okay.
Cultural immersion, that can be trying to barbecue, it can be going to the museum, it can be learning the local dance or maybe the dialects, whatever. It's cultural immersion. Community events and activities. So rodeos and farmers markets and cook-offs, you name it. It's the best way to see a town. And every neighborhood town in America has them in the summer, especially.
Yeah.
The third is a critical piece, which is volunteer or service. So all of our exchanges have a day of volunteering, and we really tailor that to working on a particularly difficult local issue, one that maybe our travelers have never experienced firsthand before. And it's usually quite a thing to see kids from California rebuild a home that had been leveled by a hurricane, and then ask their friends from Louisiana, why do you live here if you get hit by one of these things every year? And then their answer is stirring and enlightening. And then the last category is what we call professional development, which is really another way of saying connecting with interesting local professionals throughout the week. And that takes also many different forms. So within those buckets, our exchange managers and our students come up with a itinerary that is meant to both be a kind of red carpet trip to the town where we're going to do the coolest, the most fun, and the best, and then also an unvarnished and honest look at what it's like to grow up here. The best example I could give is in my own hometown of Sudbury. There's the Wayside Inn, which is famous from the old Longfellow poem. It's a kind of a colonial, iconic Massachusetts institution. And it's beautiful and it's quaint, and there's a little restaurant there and beautiful walking grounds. And tourists during leaf change season every year, all fall, are going to the Wayside Inn. And you can't come to my town without seeing the Wayside Inn. I think maybe in the 20 years I spent growing up there, we went maybe twice.
Right.
Sudbury Pizza, the greasy pizza joint across the street from the supermarket in the middle of town, we were there every week. And if you want to know what it means to grow up in Sudbury, got to go get a slice at Sudpiece. And the American Exchange Project, we do both kinds of activities. What's the Sudbury Pizza stuff? What's the Wayside Inn stuff?
That's very cool. We're accidentally recreating your exchange pipeline. You're from the Sudbury, Massachusetts, and I'm from Kansas. So we've done the Dodge City Sudbury connection virtually.
Yeah. Where in Kansas are you from?
I'm from Kansas City, but I had some friends or family in Dodge City that I visited a handful of times. I love that modeling of sort of these intentional immersion experiences. I think that checks so many boxes for what we at Getting Smart think of as powerful learning. You have service and kind of more values based. You have real world learning and kind of professions based exposure. You have this kind of cultural component. So I would love to know, on a more personal note, how has this shaped how you travel? we don't talk about travel and exchange in the same way. They are sort of like different
Mhm.
fundamentally. And yet, from my own place of curiosity, the last like few times I've traveled, I have been feeling like I am more of an extractive presence than a contributive one to the
Mhm.
communities. Like I tried volunteering on a place when I was traveling and it was really rewarding. And then I've gone to some other places and I either haven't made that connection or haven't been able to do it. So I'm just curious how you like kind of live this out, or even how you would advise people to kind of start living some of these tenets in their own travel, because this shouldn't stop when you're a college freshman. Like this
No,
should technically be our way. You leave home all the time and you come back home with more, but it's so rare that a vacation or a trip feels like that. Like it feels
no.
like it's just charging and recharging and sometimes depleting a battery further if it's a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
logistics.
Bring me
Uh,
my cheeseburger and my drink with my little umbrella, please. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So yeah, I don't know, messy question, but I'm just curious if it's had any, if
That's
that
a
framing has
perfect
had any
question.
staying power for your own.
Yeah. Well, the professional reality is that it's made me travel a lot more for speeches and talks and
For
visits.
sure.
And I'm on the road a ton, and that part of it, from the personal side, breaks my heart a little bit because I never get to stay anywhere as long as I'd like to. And
Right.
I think just by disposition, I'm someone that would probably go anywhere and is interested in. It might make me a little bit difficult to live with because I don't think I've ever driven through a place that I wouldn't want to pull over and learn. I'd say that I think the American Exchange Project for my own travel has done two things. First, it's had me reflect on how I liked to travel before all of this. And there's a difference between an experience, which is a trip, and an adventure. And if you ask most people about the most important moments in their lives and the most important experiences in their lives, they're almost never going to say that time I laid on the beach and had a cheeseburger and a little umbrella brought to me. Almost everybody will talk about an adventure. And I have become a much more rigorous adventure seeker
Hmm.
since starting this. For example, my brother and one of my great friends and I, a week from today, will be surfing around Southern California and then driving to Yosemite to do a 34-mile high elevation trek where we're going to summit Half Dome at the end of it. And we're going to try to do that in 3 days.
Love it.
And we're partially doing it because none of us has ever done anything like that before. And there's a lot that's going to come up along the way that we didn't know. There's a lot where we're going to have to throw the plan out the window. It's an adventure.
For sure.
The second way I'd say the American Exchange Project has really shaped how I travel and more than travel, than interact with people, is it's reaffirmed for me the conviction that you've never met a person in your entire life that didn't have something to teach you. And you can orient yourself toward the strangers you run into every day in a way that's judgmental, or passive, or apathetic, or extractive.
Yep.
Give me the thing I need or paid for. Thank you. Have a nice day. And many of us do that without ill intent of any kind. And many of us do that while abiding by the norms and pleasantries that that indicate a kind of polite society and polite behavior. And that's all well and good, truly. But any person I think you knock into that you don't take the time to at least chat with for a few minutes and get to know a little bit is a missed opportunity for your own life and a missed opportunity for you to learn something about your own life. I don't think one can ever have too many friends. I mean, I don't think one can ever have too many valuable social experiences in one's life. And I do think that if we want to abide by any kind of humanity, then we are obligated to take a genuine interest in the people we knock into. And the biggest disposition I am trying to emulate in my own life or live in my own life, and the biggest disposition I am trying to push onto all of our students is that of curiosity.
Yep.
I think any experience in education needs to teach students how to learn as much as it should teach them what to learn.
Yep.
And if you can learn how to learn, then your life will be growing for as long as you're alive. And travel, the experience of travel, pushes your antenna by the very facet of being in a new place as high as they will ever go. And so if you love learning, then you're going to love traveling. And and part of traveling is not just going to a place and seeing what that place wants to show you, but part of traveling is also being your own kind of a detective,
Yep.
unearthing your own story about that place and connecting with your own people, and not letting your impressions define a place that you don't know very much about. Letting the people who live there do that for
Yeah, that's super smart. Okay, I recently heard something and I've quoted it a bunch, so I need to figure out where it actually came from. But I was reading something and this person was being interviewed and the person was like, "Do you ever get afraid basically? Like do you ever feel fear?" And the person's response was, "Not more than I feel curiosity."
you.
And so like there's this sort of spectrum of like curiosity to fear that I really like, especially in something
Yeah.
like travel where a lot of people don't do it because of caution or fear for whatever reason. Maybe it's sort of in theory dangerous to go to a certain place because there's something happening in this one very specific spot. And then at the same time, the Ezra Klein podcast, like a few months ago, he was talking with Chris Hayes from MSNBC about his new book. And they were talking a lot about it's a similar spectrum, but they were talking about the opposite of dread being not hope, but wonder.
Mm.
And so I think that like these are like the spectrums I'm continuing to sit with over time of like,
Mm.
especially in a time where so many people are acting out of a place of scarcity, acting out of a place of fear. How do we continue to put curiosity, wonder, these like really human bridging connection points together and put them at the front of learning experiences? So I just love that you kind of iterated that as well. And
You've asked the critical question right there. How
yeah,
do we move ourselves away from fear and toward curiosity? How do we move ourselves away from dread and toward wonder? And I I couldn't agree more. Before my road trip, I was very nervous. And
naturally,
I was too much of a fancied himself a college he-man to ever admit it, which of course just made me more afraid because I
of
wasn't
course.
expressing it. And what scared me more than anything was that none of the contacts I'd written to in any of the locations I was planning to go to had written me back.
Hmm.
And so there I was planning this whole summer with some money from my school, and no one was getting back to me. And I think it was my dad who just said, just go.
Hmm.
Just go. What else do you have to do? And you're right. Pardon my French, but screw it. Let's just go. So I
That is
did.
some tame
And I
French.
sent an email saying, I'm coming. And the day before I got to my first town, the day before I got to Cotulla, Texas, you'll never guess who wrote me and said, we can't wait to see you. We'll meet you for
Yep.
dinner tomorrow night. And
Amazing.
I think there's this kind of paralysis through overanalysis going on where we talk and think about and rationalize and analyze these emotional spectrums and different approaches and ways to be happy. And I often think, just go.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great message for people at any age
Yeah.
to just go.
Yeah.
All right, give me just a couple words on kind of where you all are headed next.
Yeah.
Like what are some goals? What does scale look like for you?
Yeah.
And then we can kind of land this thing.
Great. Well, right now we're at the beginning of a very large growth campaign. And I'm hoping that 1 year from now, there'll be 400 high schools in all 50 states and possibly even a territory or two as well, running the American Exchange Project at their schools. So
Hmm.
right now, we have an open call out looking for educators and principals and administrators across the country who want their students to have an experience like this. And the story for us for the next year is going to be that of growth, scaling. We are very lucky to work with some extraordinary funders and philanthropies across the country. They have been enormously generous and allowed us to grow our program to a great degree, and I think that's going to continue. We are also starting to advance legislation and public funding in a number of states as well to make domestic exchanges part of education departments at the state level. And then we're building the tools and the technologies and the infrastructure we need so that when we get to 400 high schools and the thousands and thousands of students that'll come from those 400 high schools, we'll be using the same models and tools that we'll need when one day hundreds of thousands and maybe even 1 million kids a year are doing this. So this growth campaign is in one effort to get us all over the country, and then in one effort to develop the skills and tools and infrastructure that we need to make this as scalable as possible. And our pitch, our dream is kind of what I said at the beginning of the call. Let's take a note from the Erasmus program in Europe and bring domestic exchange here. I think our country is really getting in its own way by not offering to students any kind of uniform civic coming of age ritual. And because young people are coming of age in their own silos, they are primed for the sorts of division and the sorts of, the kind of perception gap, to put it lightly, that we see across the country today. And I see in this experience, a week in a different town and a week hanging out with kids in your own hometown, an opportunity for the kind of ritual this country may need right now.
Beautiful. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for sharing about this awesome program. And we'll have links in the show notes for everybody to find everything that they could possibly need to learn more and reach out to contact you all. But it's been great. Thanks for staying curious and helping me do the same today. Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting edge, we need people in the field to tell us what they're hearing, what they're wanting, and what they're needing to learn more about. Got a topic or a guest in mind? Send your recommendations to me, Mason at gettingsmart.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave a review in Apple Podcasts or subscribe wherever you listen. Feel free to share the podcast on social media using the hashtag GSPodcasts. Thanks so much.